Erev Tov, everybody. It is late on Monday night, Parashat Shlach Lecha. Thanks for joining. Coming straight from Yeshivat Maharat's graduation, which is always an incredibly inspiring and moving ceremony for those who are able to be there in person or watch it online. And incredible graduates and 25 new clergy leaders and rabbinic leaders in Am Yisrael is a huge benefit. Um, if you didn't get a chance to see it, it's worth trying to watch the video of the graduates who each spoke very briefly and very profoundly. Coming from there, and actually, this essay makes me think about Rabbi Anat, an early Maharat graduate and past Bait rabbinic team member, who spoke a lot about how our thoughts shape our actions. And that's the topic of this essay. Uh, as you've already seen and will continue to see, this is really a different style. I would say probably maybe the least textually analytical of our companions in studying the weekly Parsha. Um, we really unpack an idea in a great generality, look at one text that takes it in a spiritual, psychological realm and attempt to apply it with the help of other thinkers. So I know it's each foray into a different commentary and interpreter gives us a different style, and I find these very resonant, but they really are different. Um, a little less analysis of the text of the parsha itself. So that's um, just by way of clarification of setting expectations for our learning through the book of Bamidbar. I'm going to share my screen and we'll begin at this late hour. Shlach Lecha. This is one of the parshiot that sometimes is called by a two-word name. It's interesting just to think about the various trivia of parsha names, how they get their name, how far into the parsha till we get to the word, which is the name of the parsha. When does the parsha have, a two-word name versus a one-word name? There are certain roots that appear in multiple parshiot. Interesting little curiosities. And here's what Rav Josh Fagelson shares with us. Abracha asks if there'll be a recording of Maharat. I assume if you're on the Maharat email list, you will certainly be able to access it. If not, you can drop me a reminder and I'll see if I can get it over to you when it's released. In the essay in Parashat Va'era, so again, Rabbi Josh Figelson's book covers each of the weekly parshiot. We've only joined now in Bamidbar, but he does make reference back to other essays, ones that we haven't seen. In the essay in Parashat Va'era, I refer to 20th century psychologist Jerome Bruner, who discusses how we make meaning. I applied his teaching particularly to ritualized acts like mitzvot. I want to return to Bruner, specifically a point he makes about the power of institutions in shaping our thought. This is a quote. Experience in and memory of the social world are powerfully structured not only by deeply internalized and narrativized conceptions of folk psychology, but also by the historically rooted institutions that a culture elaborates to support and enforce them. Okay, so the way we experience and remember our social world, a world of human interaction around us, not just, what's inside us, how we've internalized, our senses of folk psychology, as he says, but also the institutions that our culture develops to support those conceptions about who people are, how we relate to and understand one another. As an example, Bruner cites F. Scott Fitzgerald's story, The Rich Boy, which begins with the observation, let me tell you about the very rich. They are different from you and me. Bruner observes that this is, quote, not just because they have fortunes, they are seen as different and indeed act accordingly, end quote. As another example, Bruner refers to established scientific evidence of gender bias. He concludes by saying the very structure of our lexicon while it may not force us to code human events in a particular way, certainly predisposes us to be culturally canonical. I don't know if it's jargon, but a lot of um, thought speak here. We'll make the best of it that we can. Now we get, again, having quoted from a thinker or two, we'll come to Rabbi Fagelson's kind of summary and distillation. Language, whether the unspoken language of thought, the communicated language of speech and writing, or the embodied language of social comportment, relies on, generates, and exists in tension with all sorts of rules and codes. We learn these conventions primarily through osmosis, right, absorbing them unconsciously from our environment, perhaps more accurately, mimesis, right, copying or mimicking the role models and people around us. As we listen to language being used, observe the way people interact, and so forth. That is, we primarily pick up language unconsciously. Okay? That's the main point here. We primarily pick up language unconsciously. Precisely because that process is unconscious, all kinds of structural biases creep in and shape our thoughts. Whether the gender bias Bruner mentions, the structuring attitudes toward wealth alluded to by Fitzgerald, or a host of other unconscious influences having to do with race, gender, sexuality, nationality, religion, education level. The list is fairly endless, right? We absorb unconsciously our attitudes or influences about how we view those differentiations between people. Parshat Shlach Lecha, we're going to segue now to our parasha, invites us to reflect on how we may fall victim to these unconscious forces. Quoting from Numbers 13:33, right, when the scouts come back and talk about the land, they say, "V'anehi ve'einenu kachagavim, v'chein hayinu be'eineihem." We looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them, to the inhabitants of the land. Report the spies after the reconnoitering of the land of Canaan. Where did they get this idea? What prior attitudes may have been at work, shaping their self-conception and their projection of that self-conception onto the inhabitants of the land, right? He's asking a question about both of the halves of what they say. They say, we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and we must have looked like grasshoppers to the giants of the land. Why, you know, you could maybe understand why we might have looked like grasshoppers to the giants of the land if we were smaller than them, but the discrepancy maybe is bigger than it has to be. But why did we look like grasshoppers to ourselves? What prior attitudes may have been at work? Likewise, what might it have been in Kalev and Yehoshua that enabled them not to fall victim to this narrative and instead to believe in their own agency, right? That they could, everyone saw the same thing, but 10 of the scouts came back and said, there's nothing we can do. We have to go back to Egypt. And two of them said, Alon na'aleh, we can certainly ascend and have a conquest of the land. What different dimensions of personality or psychology or unconscious influence would have shaped the two different responses between these two groups? Seemingly as a direct response to the episode of the spies, the very last paragraph of the Parsha includes the commandment to make tzitzit, fringes, on the corners of our garments. We are to look at them and thereby remember the role of the Holy One in bringing us out of Egypt. Whereas the spies were commanded latur, to scout out the land, a quote that comes up a number of times, the mitzvah of tzitzit instructs us to look at the fringes and remember the mitzvot. Velo taturu, we say it in the third paragraph of Shema. Velo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei nechem. So that you don't follow, same verb, lo taturu, but here being instructed not to, so that you don't follow after your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. That is, in looking at the tzitzit and remembering the Exodus, we are, it seems, meant to disrupt the normal conventions of our conditioning, just as God disrupted the political and moral order by performing the act of redemption itself. Building on this theme, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev offers the following short reflection on the last line of the Parsha. Okay, so we have our setup here again of the idea that we have lots of absorbed, unconscious biases that shape our perspectives and our actions. Um, then we see in our parsha a little moment where it feels like that's at play somehow for the scouts, and their two different reports reflect that there still can be differences in how we think, even if we're exposed to similar influences, and how we therefore view ourselves and imagine others viewing us and view them. And then he takes us to the end of the parsha where we see tzitzit and we see this contrast being set up. The spies were commanded to latul, to have some kind of following after their eyes. And the mitzvah of tzitzit says to us, hold on, we don't have to be held, you know, uh, kind of to, unfortunate language for today, but we don't have to be held hostage or held captive by the things we see and where our heart directs us. We can, choose how we want to direct ourselves. And this is connected to Yetziat Mitzrayim, he suggests, because God was the model. God took us out of Egypt, which was against all convention and against all, standard order of the world. And that reminds us that we too can break free of convention or the conditioning that we have and change our perspective and change the world. So that's his kind of the arc of his initial thought. And now we have the Hasidic passage, the Kedushat Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, on the very, very end of the Parsha, which is also the end of the third paragraph of Shema. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem. Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Right, so that phrase, I am the Lord your God, both begins and ends this verse from chapter 15, verse 41, towards the end of our parasha. Why the repetition? Right, in the Hebrew, it just simply sort of states it. Kefel, it's doubled. I am the Lord your God is doubled at the beginning of the verse and the end. Why the repetition? We take it as an established, this is the Kedushat Levi. We take it as an established general principle that we must constantly bring to mind that all our words, thoughts, and movements in this world make an imprint in the celestial world above. Therefore, we must attend carefully to all our thoughts, movements, and words, with profound awareness of their awesome potential, since every action carries cosmic significance. This is, in fact, a guiding value in our service of the Creator. The Hebrew there, Avduta Adam, our service. For the blessed ineffable one, that's God, is conscious of human thought and continually watches over and cares about all the ways we act and live. Practicing with this awareness is the essence of our service of the divine, to be constantly aware that the blessed ineffable one watches over us and our ways, and is impacted by them. This, then, is the significance of the repeated phrases in our verse. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Bring to mind always that I am the Lord your God. I constantly watch over all your ways. That's the passage of the Kedushat Levi. Now he's going to unpack it. For the Kedushat Levi, our unconscious, unthinking thoughts, impulses, and drives are Egypt. The commandment of Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim, remembering the Exodus from Egypt, is not only about remembering the historical event of the Exodus, but in each and every moment, bringing mindful awareness to our thoughts, words, and actions. This is already a theme we've seen from Rabbi Fagelson, who is the head of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. So mindfulness, awareness, deliberation, and intention are things that he brings up regularly, and we're seeing that here. In bringing that attention and awareness to our inner lives, we constantly reenact the Exodus. But beyond this, it is not we who take ourselves out. Rather, it is the divine. Just as the Holy One took our ancestors out of Egypt, so too, in every moment in which we bring mindful awareness to our thoughts, words, and deeds, the Holy One is bringing us personally out of Egypt. This is what the Kedushat Levi means by referring to Hashgacha Pratit, or individual divine providence. And this is I think the typical way Jewish philosophers think about divine providence. Not exclusively, but typical is a little bit more direct, if that's the right word to use. God, oversees our every action. He's going to interpret it a little bit differently. That what the Kedushat Levi means by hashgacha pratit or individual divine providence, less that God looks out for us like a guardian angel, right, oversees our every action, and more that the Redeemer is continually working through us to enable us to become free from the Egypt of our lesser thoughts and impulses. So when he talks about God constantly watching over and caring about all the ways we act and live, doesn't necessarily invite us to sort of picture metaphorically, an eye that's actually watching, but that God's presence in our lives is to help us to become attuned to everything that we are doing and that's happening to us. Thus, the Kedushat Levi reads the full verse to say, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. And thus, when you bring mindful awareness to each moment, I am working through you to liberate you anew. And then it ends again, I am the Lord your God. When we live out this kind of awareness and with the concomitant awe that every thought, word, and action matters in the most profound sense, then the divine is made manifest in our own lives and in the world. Okay, so we have to bring the mindful awareness as step one, and then live actively with that awareness is step two, and that's what brings God even more into the world. One of the elements of the Kedushat Levi I find most striking is the language of Roshem, or imprint. Right? We have that all our words, thoughts, and movements in this world make an imprint in the celestial world above, and it definitely appears a second time, although he doesn't use the translation of imprint again. Like other Hasidic masters, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak offers us the image of our own lives and actions, leaving a trace, a footprint in another stratum of reality, right? That's what he said at the very beginning. We have to always remember that our words, thoughts, and movements in this world make an imprint in the celestial world above. It's not something which would be obvious to us, but it is a classic Hasidic teaching that our own lives and actions leave a trace, a footprint in another stratum of reality. Returning to Jerome Bruner, there seems here to be an inversion. Right up until now, we were sort of talking about the unconscious forces that shape us. Now we're going to go in the other direction. The institutional forces of language and the forces that contribute to the creation and sustenance of that language leave their imprint on us subconsciously as we pick up the words and cues of a culture. And then we reinscribe their imprint by using them. In the Kedushat Levi's teaching, however, it is we, even on an individual level, who leave an imprint on the upper worlds. Within this inversion, right? So again, I think I miss sort of punctuated it almost, but they're in the go back a moment. The institutional forces of language leave their imprint on us as we pick up the words and cues of a culture, and we reinscribe their imprint almost sort of on ourselves by using them. But mostly those forces are imprinting on us. Whereas in the Kedushat Levi's teaching, it is we who leave an imprint on the upper worlds, and we don't even need a whole culture. We do it as every individual. Within this inversion, I would suggest, lies an invitation, a call to Jewish mindfulness as a vital form of protest against oppressive forces, Mitzrayim. In her book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, legal scholar Rhonda McGee discusses how our individual practice can, and indeed must, be brought to bear in service of upending the kinds of unconscious bias that is hardwired into us, our language, and much of our society. In doing so, she echoes the Kedushat Levi. This is her quote. And again, of course, it's Rabbi Josh Fagelson who's putting these two sources in conversation. When stressed out or when operating on automatic pilot, we often retreat into the ways we have been trained. We read cues that we have associated with race, cues that intersect race with gender, sexual orientation, and other forms of identification. In ways that range from unconscious to blatantly obvious, we all read and rely on such cues. If we see ourselves as separate, hard-bound, and apart from other humans in essential ways, as many people do, then the subtle but life-shaping trainings of race make our hyper-individualized identities seem all the more real. Ideas about race reinforce our tendency not only to see ourselves as separate from others in profound ways, but also to group others along the lines of demarcation that we have been taught to see. We are each and all engaged to one degree or another in race making or doing race, the processes and practices by and through which racialization happens. In many and various ways, we participate in the activities by which the idea of race remains strong, and the practices of racism remain relational. We do this in subtle, fleeting moments, in decisions such as where we will live, from whom we will learn, and so on, that set us on one road and all but foreclose others. Whether we are black, white, brown, yellow, or red, we are caught up in racecraft. Okay, so this is just her pointing out this idea of ideas from our culture impact us, leave their imprint on us, and then we act them out and kind of continue to extend that imprint. And yet, if we can see more clearly through the lenses of awareness, right? That's the Shema saying, Lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem. Don't go after your eyes and heart the way they would take you, but see more clearly through the lenses of awareness. We recognize that while we are trained for division in so many ways, we are also inherently capable of experiencing connection with one another. Becoming more aware of our own racecraft, our own subtle racial predispositions and predictions, is a step towards increasing our capacity for doing just that. Noticing that we are sometimes guilty of microaggressions is another step in the right direction. Practicing mindful awareness of these aspects of our conditioning and habits of the mind helps us know what we are up against within ourselves as we seek to make change in the world. Right? So again, as a typical or classic teaching from Rabbi Josh Feigelson, it starts with mindfulness, with awareness of the things, subtle things that are impacting and shaping our choices and our biases. And he now develops this last little bit, which is really interesting, what we are up against within ourselves as we seek to make change in the world. He writes, the thing we are up against within ourselves we might call our own Egypt. In bringing mindful awareness to our thoughts, words, and actions, we are, with the aid of the Creator, liberating ourselves from Egypt once again and again and again. Through an accumulation of countless acts of liberation, we might just invite others into doing the same, thereby helping to liberate them. And if enough of us live into this kind of consciousness, the systems and languages of oppression may finally be upended. Meaning, in a sense, right, as opposed to grand rallies or, you know, legislations, all of which are important in their own right, a lot starts with noticing our own biases and how we've been conditioned and trying to start with awareness of that. And if we do that and invite others to do the same, then the systems and languages of oppression may finally be upended. Those countless acts of liberation, again, liberation from the Egypt of our own fixed, predisposed attitudes, come about not through simply good intentions, but through practice. Another of his key ideas, right? We actually, as much as this feels heady and intellectual and inside ourselves, it also has to come out into the real world. Remembering the exodus from Egypt is the stated purpose for numerous mitzvot, embodied practices and disciplines, ranging from observing Shabbat to the Passover Seder to, in Parshat Shalach, affixing and beholding the tzitzit on the corners of our garments, right? The purpose of that, as stated in some way, is oritemoto, you remember all the commandments and you remember God who took you out of Egypt. Through an exquisite range of such practices, the Torah invites us to practice a more liberatory awareness, to reenact the Exodus in every moment of every day. So again, in this one, I think there feels like lots more development outside the text. Um, but his hook is the question of how do we view ourselves? What awarenesses do we carry into our perspectives on ourselves, and how do we project those perspectives on others? And how could we stop, take our time, unpack those preconditioned ways of seeing ourselves or others, and then that could be the beginning of changing those things, and that's the idea of the tzitzit, and that's reflected as the Kedushat Levi interprets it in that last line of the section on tzitzit. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. Again, I am the Lord your God, which is this sort of double language, is both about beginning to notice our, bringing our mindful awareness to each moment, and then living out that awareness, including the knowledge, kind of radical knowledge, that our actions have real impact, not just in this world, but somehow in the world beyond. Um, Great. His questions for reflection and conversation, then I'll open up for your thoughts. The Kedushat Levi says, the blessed and ineffable one is conscious of human thought and continually watches over and cares about all the ways we act and live. How do you understand this, if you do at all? What does it mean to you, if anything, that God watches over and cares about you and your behavior? Do you find this idea comforting, challenging, inviting, repelling, or something else? Why or why not? So a question about, hashgacha pratit. How do we understand or think about the idea of God's awareness of all our actions? Both Kedushat Levi and McGee, that was this author, legal scholar Rhonda McGee, point us to a practice of constant awareness. Is this something with which you are familiar? Is it a practice to which you aspire? When, how, why, or why not? I think we spoke about this already last week, and I'm sure we'll return to it again. The balance between the unexamined life and the over-examined life. And then finally, he asks, when, if ever, have you encountered a moment or incident in which you became more aware or conscious of some unconscious impulses, biases, or assumptions? What happened? What was it about you in that moment that enabled that awareness to come about? What was it about the other people or the setting in which the incident took place that helped it to happen? Can you imagine that this might have been a moment of the divine working through you? Play with that image, let it bring its own force to bear. How might allowing this conception of divine human interaction affect how you behave in the future? Would you want to cultivate this experience? If so, what might you have to do? Practices, intentional communities of awareness and action, reading and talking, etc. And then in the ideas for practice, he encourages really taking time with the tzitzit um, of a talit, or that's worn on the body, to really cultivate awareness, and think about becoming conscious of the thoughts and biases that we're generally unconscious of. Um, okay, again, a little bit heady, a little bit philosophical, but happy to hear any thoughts or reactions, whether linked to the Parsha, or the Hasidic teaching, or in general. Yeah, Bracha, go ahead.
So I have, first of all, it was very interesting into the whole thing with mindfulness. My comments are more related to things that struck me in the verses and stuff like that. The first one is that I'm starting to see acharei nechem v'acharei levavchem somewhat differently from how I had seen it before. So it's kind of meant as a caution, not to be led astray by what your eyes see and what your heart kind of spontaneously motivates you towards, which sort of gives you a feeling of that you're headed towards bad naturally. and for some reason that's tonight not sitting well with me. So what that evokes in me is that maybe what it really means is just like the thing with don't stop your Torah study to look at a tree. So if you see it as stopping, that's the problem, not that the tree is the problem. So I'm sort of seeing the same thing here, that maybe what it's saying is that rather than just being led astray by those things, uh, don't go past them. Don't skip over them. And that ties in very well with his mindfulness concept. Don't just go past them and not realize their impact, and that way we can actually feel that we have a voice, that there are things that we're supposed to understand from our actions and from what comes to us in our heart, that could be holy and that are not just temptations.
Mm.
So it's another way to liberation. And the other thing is, which is something that I've always noticed in terms of the famous thing that we're supposed to remember with Yetzias Mitzrayim, that's not a fait accompli. As he's reiterating, the mindfulness that you need to evoke this liberation every day and through mindfulness. But that what we're being asked to do is not to remember the past or only think of the future. Like we're not told to remember the slavery. We're not told to remember the result of the freedom, but what we're told to remember is the process, the importance of the process, the Yitziat Mitzrayim, the
Yeah.
process of going out from Egypt, that's the key factor. And that's what we're supposed to learn from and grow from.
Oh, beautiful. A lot of rich thought. And yes, I think I don't remember the grammatical terms, but when we say lotat, don't go astray after your eyes and your heart that you lust after, that could be uh, because that's the definition of what your eyes and heart do, or it could say your eyes and heart can go in different directions, and it's the things that you lust after that you're not supposed to go after. Don't go after your eyes and heart when they're lusting after the wrong thing, but they also can completely take you in the right direction. The way to know that is to get yourself to a slightly additional level of, reflection and intentionality. But it's right, the the Egypt is almost the unintentional or unconscious. That's not necessarily specifically the bad, but the unintentional. But I do think that's a charitable read, and it does feel a little bit like the text is pointing to the idea that we have strong natural inclinations and urges that are not in the right direction, and we have to figure out how to manage them. And that's not the only voice in the Bible or in Jewish tradition, and needs consideration and maybe moderation. Um, so thank you. Other thoughts or reactions to this passage or this line of thought? Again, the connection to the Parsha is in many ways feels a little bit more on the tzitzit side of things, which is where the Hasidic passage comes from, than the little comment about the scouts. But both are present. The scouts certainly, are this test case of how do 12 people who see the same thing come out with these different reactions, and what does it say about, you know, how the lenses through which they saw things. Debbie, please.
I wanted to respond. I had two ideas. One, I wanted to respond to something that Bracha had said, that when we're told to remember Mitzrayim, it's not only Yitziah, but also Gerim Hayitem, that we're supposed to remember the experience of being the other or being the downtrodden, and then have compassion or empathy for those who are the other, or who are less well off in society, on all the chagim or throughout the year, I guess. That's an additional component. That's repeated so often in Chumash.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought it was interesting, something you had said at the very beginning as you were reading it, about the chagavim, that you commented on the first part of the sentence, that they saw themselves as chagavim, and you didn't find difficulty with the second part, that's how they were perceived by others.
Yeah.
I always find it seems to me very logical that they would see themselves as chagavim. They had just been slaves, they didn't have much self-esteem.
Mm.
But the fact, I thought, what always strikes me as so sad is that they project onto others
Yeah.
how they will be, because how you think you are, that's understandable. But to think that you could know how others see you, that's, and there it is. And they saw us like,
Right.
it's at that point that I know that they can't go in the land.
Right.
There's no way forward from there, no matter what happens.
Yeah.
But you were focusing on the first part. I just thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Great counterpoint. Thank you. Wonderful. All right. No problem with an early end. It's not early. So hopefully, I see Moshe and Joan unmuted to share something, please.
Yeah, no, I always used to say that they should have sent women as the spies because the women want to go right away into Eretz Yisrael, not wait. And I once read a book about it was supposed to be about the Israeli, Secret Service, every spy a prince,
Mm.
how when they want to revenge, the Munich, massacre, they happened to found there was like an Arab guy, I think in Norway or Sweden. So I think, he must be one of the Palestinians, hiding out. Everybody agreed, but there was one woman that said, "No, I don't think he's one of the, the terrorists." And unfortunately, she was right.
Well, okay. So,
The Clay Yucker says that. It's my favorite Clay Yucker from the whole year.
Wow.
That they should have sent women.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Because the best example of people who love Eretz Yisrael are Bernot Slavchad.
Mm-hmm. Wow, great. I look forward to looking up that Kliyakar. Yeah, and of course, in the same breath, thinking about Rabbi Fagelson's framework, we're always mindful of not overgeneralizing, right? Not having too fixed a perspective that's, men are this way, women are this way, although there's a utility to looking at those differences, and it's just being aware of it as we're doing it, and thinking about its usefulness and its complexity, that I think is part of what this is inviting us into. So yeah, great stuff to think about. Always learning from him new thinkers and new personalities, new scholars to delve into a little bit more. So
Can I just, I just wanted to say, I guess you're Andy. I'm sorry we came late, but I've been so involved with what's going on in Israel.
of course.
I do this Pens for Swords. If I recommend to everybody writing all kinds of letters, but I just want to, and signing letters. Yeah, I actually wrote one about Iran sometime back, and then they used something a little different, but I have very strong feelings about it. So I'm pins and needles waiting to see what Trump is going to do tonight. But I just wanted to say, and if I'm missing something, you're talking about the spies, and it's so interesting that we had such incredible spies in Iran. It's unbelievable what was done, and a lot of them, from what I'm hearing, were actually Iranians. They had to be, but it's just amazing what a great job they did. Unlike the spies in the Bible, I guess.
Right. They had
Can't
us.
help but bring that up, but it's absolutely beyond anything I've ever heard, and everybody says, and it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So much courage and so
Yeah.
much, you know, seeing themselves as people who could do the unthinkable, feels very, very different. And of course, as
Oh, good.
Debbie pointed out, and others, this was a generation that it had a very hard time seeing themselves as anything. They were a slave generation. We're in a different state, but even still, it is truly the unimaginable, unthinkable courage and intelligence and and sacrifice, risk. It really is
Yes.
extraordinary.
If I can just add one more thing, but I tutor a young man in Israel. He's actually 37. He's a lawyer, but he's going for his PhD. But and talking to him, they have a 17-year-old child. His wife is a doctor. 17 month, I'm sorry, 17 month. There's a big difference. And they have to move somewhere else to be with an aunt to stay in the house, and the baby is restless, and there's a young child in the house who's full of fear, and the wife has to go out because she's a doctor. We really can't even feel what the people are going through, even those who are not being directly attacked. And just speaking with him today, just the tone of his voice, and he's in the reserves. He hasn't been called up, but he would like to go and fight, but he has to take care of this baby. And there's so much going on there on the human level. I just wanted to mention that, to share with you all.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so
To
true.
pray for a great outcome here.
Yeah.
Just hoping, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing all of that. A lot to pray for. Absolutely. All right. On that note, wishing everybody, a good rest of the night, and love to mom and dad. Good night to all. Of course, I would take a moment to just check about next week, the 23rd. Um,
Yes.
I'll keep you posted. We may have a slight schedule change. Watch your email, to see whether it'll be the 23rd, this next Monday or next Tuesday. I'm not
Oh,
sure yet. Yep, I'll keep you posted.
You listed as Monday and Tuesday of this week.
Yeah, I had went back and forth, so I'll let you know once I know.
because Moshe thought it was 9 o'clock. What time did you
Yeah,
say?
oh
Thank
yeah,
you.
9 o'clock. The rest of the summer, 9 o'clock.
O'clock?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Shenishma
you.
Bsorot Tovot.
Amen. 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 Good night to all.
Mhm.